Don't believe the hype. Read the type. This is TYPBST.
Take a look, it's in a book. It's TYPBST, baby.
You're such a good singer, bro.
Huh?
You're going on
No,
The
not
Voice?
me. I hate that show, man.
Oh, my wife loves The Voice.
Really? Oh,
It's
man.
like a well,
my
'cause
mom,
it's
my
a
mom likes it too.
it's a competition that's like, the hosts or whatever the judges are also competing against each other. So I think that's why Jenna likes it, because it's a little bit more like it's. I don't know. I would say it's a little, at least from what I've seen, I liked it better than what's that other one? The one that was famous for long years. I think it's back still. The singing competition that's been around forever. Anyways, doesn't matter.
Mhm.
But so what are you bringing the audience this week with good old TYPBST?
Okay, so this book was recommended by a listener, and he kept pushing me. He's like, "Yo, you need to cover this book. You need to cover this book. You need to cover this book." And then during the break, I was listening to a podcast with Rick Rubin, which is the Jewish guy who started Def Jam, and he was interviewing Andre Benjamin, Andre 3000 of Outkast. And, Andre referenced to this book, and he was like, "Oh, man, this book is so amazing. It was very helpful." And I was like, "Oh, shoot, I better go cover it. If Andre 3000's reading it, then I guess I gotta take a look at it." So we'll be looking at the book Outliers, The Story of Success by Malcom Gladwell. And so this one was a national bestseller. And
So I was just going to ask you a quick question. Just by looking at the table of contents, there's a Bible verse referenced as part of, one of the chapters. Trouble with geniuses, ethnic theory of plane crashes. So, to kind of give the book a category, like to some extent, I'm like, oh, is it biblical? Or, but then some of the other stuff is like, doesn't look like it's biblical. So how would you kind of classify this book if you were trying to put it in a genre?
Oh, well, a genre. I would definitely say it's definitely part narrative or majority narrative, because even like when I first get the books, I always want to look at the table of contents to get a feel for it, and I was totally lost when I read the table of contents. I was like, what? I was like, what is this? I can't trace a flow of thought, and the reason why.
Yeah, your how to read a book application kind of failed you.
Yeah.
Because the way that the structure is laid out in the table of contents.
It threw me off, but generally, he's telling stories, right? Stories of success. So, Malcom Gladwell, he's a Canadian journalist and writer best known for his unique perspective on popular culture. So he writes for The New Yorker, and he's been doing that since '96.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, so basically, well, I think we should first answer, what is an outlier? So an outlier is a scientific term to describe things or phenomena that lie outside normal experience. And now, what is the book about? So
I want to, can I jump in for a second? It's so funny you went on that, define an outlier, because for me, I was like, oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. I didn't even think that there was a need to do that. But that's because I'm looking at it statistically. And so from a statistical perspective, outliers are generally things that when you look at the data point is kind of outside of where all the other data is sitting. Right, so it's like you look at the averages of a class, the grades, and all of a sudden you've got some one kid. Like a good example would be like every test someone's getting 60, 60, 60, 60, and then a guy gets 99 on one test. That 99 is considered the outlier because it's just it doesn't fit. So I don't know. I just thought the statistical approach might help for some of our audience.
Okay, so Outliers is what the book is about Everything we have learned in Outliers says that success follows a predictable course. It is not the brightest who succeed. If it were, Chris Langlin, a guy who I'm going to talk about later, would be up there with Einstein. Nor is success simply the sum of the decisions and efforts we make on our own. It is rather a gift. Outliers are those who have been given opportunities and who have had the strength and presence of mind to seize them. And so he goes through numerous stories of people who have been successful. Now, I'll say this out from the jump, where I disagree with the book and where I would push back on the book. I think that the title could be a bit misleading because it's called Outliers and the tagline is the story of success. But I would say it's the story of those who are really successful or really, really successful, the super successful. Because the stories he gives are great illustrations of how it isn't just a person's will that gets them to the top, but numerous factors that contribute to a person's success. And a lot of times it can lead to somebody becoming very fatalistic, meaning they think because things are already predetermined or things have to fall a certain way, they're not going to try it, and they become pessimistic. So that you can kind of take away pessimism from it if you were reading it from the wrong lens. And so again, I just thought it was just kind of misleading in saying, okay, well, this is a story of success in general, when actually this is more of a story about success in unique,
random circumstances.
Not random.
No, unique, I think, is the right word. I think that's a better word.
Yeah, in unique ways. Yeah. So one of the stories that he mentions is, or I should say, 5 things that stuck out to me from the book on how to be really, really successful. I'm not going to say normal successful, but really, really successful. So you have luck, when and where you were born, and then you have the 10,000 hours principle. And basically the 10,000 hours is you taking 10,000 hours for you to become a professional. And then there's also the Hamburg opportunities. And the Hamburg opportunities was a story where he talked about the Beatles and how the Beatles had this unique opportunity to work on their playing and their sets in a unique situation that helped them basically become professionals without even basically helped them to become professionals. And then there's the cultural legacies. Basically, legacies matter. And then there's a hard work principle. So all 5 of those things, when all those things align, usually leads to people being very, very successful.
Yeah, so I mean, based on what you've said so far, I can see what you mean by unique scenarios, because they're the story of random success, like random meaning like the person's whose story that he's telling, it's not actually necessarily let's say the protocol or the way that you as an individual become successful. It's really just a bunch of stories of peculiarity and uniqueness for these individuals that became successful. So yeah, I can kind of see why you framed the original thing about if you take the wrong perspective when reading the book, you can become pessimistic.
Yes, most definitely. So for example, there was one story about this guy named Chris Langlin, and basically he has a very high IQ. So the average high IQ of a person is 100. And Albert Einstein, his is 150. Well, Chris Langlin, his is 195.
Wow.
Right? He was talking at 6 months. Right? right? So this is a very smart individual. So basically, the way how the story goes is you would assume because a person that smart would basically be able to go anywhere and do anything they want in the world and be successful. But in comparison, his IQ in comparison to where he is now, he's pretty much would be considered a failure. And so there's a counterpart he has, a guy named Robert Oppenheimer, and he has a high IQ as well, and he went further than Chris Langland. And what's unique about the Robert Oppenheimer story is that he's a genius. He's done great things, but he also like tried killing his professor, right? And so when he got caught trying to kill his professor, he was able to talk his way out of the situation. Now, compared to Chris Langan, basically, because he grew up without the support system to nurture his IQ, he just kept missing opportunities for him to climb the academic ladder. So, for example, there was one instance where his mom didn't fill out or sign this document for him to go to school. She just never got around to it, so he didn't get to school. And then when he was short on his tuition, they basically kicked him out, and he never, took the opportunity to go and plead for the opportunity to get back into school. He kind of just blew it off, and was like, okay, well, the hierarchy doesn't believe in me, so I'm not even gonna try. And so, but then you have Robert Oppenheimer, who had a support system around him, and so he learned practical intelligence, and this was the skill on learning how to basically talk your way through things and feel your way through situations, kind of like emotional IQ. And so the principle that Malcom Gladwell was getting at was that, just because you're smart doesn't mean you are going places. You still need that support system around you. And one of the things I took away from this story was that he pointed out that, again, it's not about having being really smart. It's about being smart enough. Because he was showing a test where they were, basically doing a test study of people who were smart and following them throughout their lives. And the people with the highest IQ didn't necessarily end up in the best places. But the people who were smart enough and took advantage of their opportunities went the furthest. So, it's not about being smart, but being smart enough.
Yeah, and I think I can jump in here just to talk about IQ for a second. Some of the things I've learned, and I think this will resonate, maybe not, but I think it'll resonate with what the books talks about. A high IQ will give you an indication at how quickly somebody can learn something, but it doesn't tell you it doesn't really give you an indication of whether or not they'll be good at that thing. Right? So if I'm using it more in terms of a job, right? So if taking a high IQ person and putting them into any task, they'll learn those tasks relatively quickly. But you have to look at their character to determine whether or not that job actually fits for them, right? Because maybe the high IQ will also lead them to be very distracted and bored, such that they're not actually going to be good at that job. And so I think that's where, what you said about circumstances plays a huge role, because, IQ is like one piece of the puzzle, right? If you have a high IQ person with a high emotional intelligence, that's going to be a much more valuable asset, let's say, at a management level of an organization, as opposed to a, recluse person who's high IQ. They're probably going to be better in more of like a self-isolated context. Whether maybe that's a researcher, or an Einstein sort of scenario where they're just learning and developing, and so I just bring that up to kind of what I know about IQ, and sort of it kind of I think plays into these two scenarios of like really high intelligence people not necessarily leading to success. So I don't know, does that kind of resonate with it a bit, or do you think I'm kind of off base?
No. You hit the nail on the head. And so he continues to develop these stories, and he has this one unique story about the Jewish people and how when they first came to America, how they were successful, how they climbed the corporate ladder in regards to being lawyers, and also early on when they first came to America, dominating the garment industry. And so what's unique is that, despite being the minority, the Jews, because of their culture, they developed a privilege for themselves. So I'll just read a piece from the book, and it says, to come to New York City in the 1890s with a background in dressmaking or sewing or Schitzwarren Handlung was a stroke of extraordinary good fortune. It was like showing up in Silicon Valley in 1986 with 10,000 hours of computer programming already under your belt. There is no doubt that those Jewish immigrants arrived at the perfect time with the perfect skills, says sociologist Steven Steinberg. And so that chapter is broken down to like 3 lessons that the Jews had. The 3 lessons that led to the Jews having success in America. So one was the importance of being Jewish. And then the second was the demographic luck, and then the garment industry and the meaning and finding meaningful work. And so he was just basically like reassessing their climb from, immigrants who had nothing to people who are known for not the Old Testament, but having money. And that's something, I know a lot of times Black people will make comments like, oh, look what the Jews do.
Mm-hmm. In what regard? In terms of what you're talking about, their story from nothing to something, or in a different regard?
No, just from nothing to something. Mm-hmm. And just how they're known for being savvy and being known for doing well financially.
True.
Yeah, so I thought it was pretty inspiring as I was reading it, and just them finding the right opportunity. Well, not even just them finding the right opportunity, but divine providence, God's sovereignty plus man's free will working together to bring about these things. So a lot of times, again, like what Malcom Gladwell argues, is sometimes these things aren't even a part of, has to do with the person, right? It has to do with the situation that they were born into.
When you're talking about, product of, the luck kind of scenario, or, kind of, for these success stories, kind of things just all of a sudden happening almost. It's resonating with, I'm sure you've heard this statement. It's like, it took me 10 years to become an overnight success.
Mm-hmm. Right. And it takes time. And so now, for example, like with the Beatles, the reason why they became so successful was because they had an opportunity to cultivate their skills in Hamburg. And so here's a piece from the book, and it says, all told, so basically this is their time spent in Hamburg and perfecting their skills. All told, they performed for 270 nights in just over a year and a half. By the time they had their first burst of success in 1964, in fact, they had performed live an estimated 1,200 times. Do you know how extraordinary that is? Most bands today don't perform 1,200 times in their entire careers. The Hamburg Crucible is one of the things that set the Beatles apart. They were no good on stage when they went. They were no good on stage when they went there, and they were very good when they came back. Norman went on. They learned not only stamina, they had to learn an enormous amount of numbers, cover versions of everything you can think of, not just rock and roll, a bit of jazz too. They weren't disciplined on stage at all before that. But when they came back, they sounded like no one else. It was the making of them.
Yeah, I think that's I don't want to say a perfect example of becoming an overnight success, but that you talked about it before, 10,000 hours to become, an expert in your field. And so, to some extent, I think, the question I have for you is, for people who are successful, like for all of these stories, are you able to pull things out and say, okay, here's some things that is common amongst successful people? And I think, the 10,000 hour rule is probably one that you would say, like, that, going back to what I said, it took 10 years to become an overnight success. Like, in general, you don't just, unless you're winning the lottery, in essence, becoming successful, there are certain things that you will see amongst successful people. And I think one of them is effort.
Well, yes, effort. Yeah, effort. Yeah, but I would say, yeah, effort's a small part of it. I think the one thing that stuck out to me was the Hamburg situation, and I thought to myself, and it made me ask, and it maybe would make the listeners think and ask themselves, where was your Hamburg opportunity, where someone provided you a chance to get better at your skill, whatever it is you love to do, and finding that opportunity to get better. So I thought about a Hamburg opportunity for everybody would be quarantine, right? So that's a unique situation where everybody has downtime to go online.
Not everybody, bro.
Not everybody.
I'm
not
more
everybody.
busy than I've ever been.
Right. Yeah, some of my pastor friends. It technically it doesn't stop, but granted, you have the opportunities to go online and do a couple courses and perfect your skills. You have that downtime, so using that downtime to perfect it, and basically he was saying, okay, and the world will reward you for being really good at your skill, and this is how Bill Gates rose to the top as well. And I thought that was a really good story. And looking at Bill Gates, because we look at Bill Gates and we're really impressed with how smart he is and how much he's done and how rich he is. But there was a ton of unique situations where only because of, I would say, God's providence was he able to become who he is today. So, for example, here are the unique situations that had to happen or the unique situations that help make Bill Gates who he is today. And so it says here, opportunity number 1 was that Gates got sent to Lakeside. How many high schools in the world had access to a time-sharing terminal in 1968? Opportunity number 2 was that the mothers of Lakeside had enough money to pay for the school's computer fees. Number 3 was that when that money ran out, one of the parents happened to work at C Cubed, which happened to need someone to check its code on the weekends, and which also happened not to care if weekends turned into weeknights. Number 4 was that Gates just happened to find out about ISI, and ISI is just happened to need someone to work on its payroll software. Number 5 was that Gates happened to live within walking distance of the University of Washington, and that's where he would go and practice his coding. And then number 6 was that the university happened to have free computer time between 3 and 6 in the morning. Number 7 was that TRW happened to call Bud Permbach. Number 8 was that the best programmers Permbach knew for that particular problem happened to be 2 high school kids. And number 9 was that Lakeside was willing to let those kids spend their spring term miles away writing code. And what did virtually all of those opportunities have in common? They gave Bill Gates extra time to practice. By the time Gates dropped out of Harvard after his sophomore year to try his hand at his own software company, he'd been programming practically nonstop for 7 consecutive years. He was way past 10,000 hours.
And I think you that story is a great example of kind of what you said about COVID and people taking advantage of the opportunity. Because how many people took advantage of COVID to catch up on their TV shows?
Right. To binge watch.
Not to say that you don't take it. Everybody needs to take advantage of rest as well, right? Like, if you don't get your R&R, you're probably not going to be as productive. But, foregoing excess leisure can produce fruit in the long run.
Well, okay, but see, this is where, I can argue back based on the book that R&R may not be helpful. And so it was making an argument.
That's why I said excess. But yes,
Sorry, say what you're saying.
I said that's why I said excess R&R, right? Like the question is not that you don't need any R&R, but that sacrificing excess R&R is kind of what I'm getting at. That like,
okay,
so with COVID,
no, that's fine. No, that's fine. Because so in chapter 8, he talks about rice paddies and math tests, and basically talking about why Asians are so good at math. So the previous chapter, he was talking about, why Jews did so well for themselves in America, and now he's talking about why Asians why Asians do so well in math. And so he says, virtually every success story we've seen in this book so far involves someone or some group working harder than their peers. Bill Gates was addicted to his computer as a child. So was Bill Joy. The Beatles put in thousands of hours of practice in Hamburg. Joe Flom ground away for years perfecting the art of takeovers before he got his chance. Working really hard is what successful people do. The genius of the culture formed in the rice paddies, which is the rice fields, is that hard work gave those in the fields a way to find meaning in the midst of great uncertainty and poverty. That lesson has served Asians well in many endeavors, but rarely so perfectly as in the case of mathematics. And so basically he argues that because of the rice fields that is the hardest type of farm work to do, and because, Asian culture, the agriculture of Asia forces you to, the best type of agriculture to eat is rice. And so they've perfected making rice, but it's a very hard system to do. But they perfected it, and they developed a work ethic because of it, and that's kind of flows into their ability to do math well.
Interesting. Yeah, it's I think definitely from everything you've said, work ethic and effort and intentionality of learning and that I mean, to some extent you create your own success, right? Opportunities have to come your way. Luck, not that we necessarily believe in luck, but that idea of like circumstances have to come together. But if you're not prepared, those opportunities don't matter.
Yeah, well, essentially he was arguing for cultures matter. And because of the difficulty of Chinese culture at the time, they developed a real grit, grind mentality. And so it helped them when it came to math. And so what's interesting is that he doesn't just leave it at Asians, because, you'll say, okay, well, what about these people or that people? But then he shows how the culture was basically imitated in the KIPP charter schools in New York. And so they took that hard-nosed Asian culture and adapted it to a Bronx school system for underprivileged kids. And they showed how the KIPP charter schools, it's KIPP, the KIPP charter schools basically produce the best students. And so to get into the school, it's by lottery. It isn't necessarily by having a lot of money, but everybody's free to come, but it's by the luck of the draw. And for the kids that go there, they're basically put through a rigorous school system that has them at school from 7:30 and has them finishing school around 3. And basically it goes back to taking away the leisure of spring break or sorry, not spring break, summer holiday. So that's a sacred time in the West when kids are out for the summer. But Malcom Gladwell was showing how the summer break was killing kids academically. and so the people who started
it's such a funny sort of comment, because I've heard sort of the complete opposite. And that being, so I guess the question becomes like, it might kill them academically in the sense of scores. Would you say that's like test scores and that kind of thing?
Yeah. Essentially, he was showing like test scores and how for the Asian community, the kids don't take breaks, and it's not because the parents are being hard, but it's because the parents come from a hard place. Mm-hmm. Right? Because sometimes, I thought it was just them being hard for the sake of being hard. But, the parents come from a hard place and they pass that culture down. So the parents don't take breaks, kids don't take breaks. And so that's why the kids have less opportunity to forget what they remember in the summer. And, just reading that made me laugh, because I remember, my summer breaks were basically I didn't read, I didn't write, I didn't do any schoolwork in the summer break. So when I went back to school in September, I could barely write my name.
See, the reason I thought it was, I jumped in and kind of thought I don't want to say it was funny, but it's a bit ironic, because I've heard people kind of refer to remember I was talking about the idea of learning. I mean, I've talked about it a number of times in our conversations, but the idea that the summer is the only time kids will learn sort of on their in a self-directed manner, and that might be as simple as like building a fort, right? So learning sort of how you're trying to build a branches into a fort in the middle of the woods, and just kind of seeing how different things go together, and sort of, let's call it the practical side of physics. Or you're building a skateboard ramp and realizing that the wood just fell over the first time you tried to ride up it because you sucked at building it, right? And so I'm just saying, like, the person that I'm thinking of, or the quote that I'm thinking of, was like this idea, like summer is the only time that the kids will adventure and sort of learn in a natural course, which I think this person would argue, and I would actually argue to some extent, when we enter the workforce, how much of the learning is self-directed as a result of you encountering a problem and you're trying to, okay, what's the best way to solve this? And do I have to start Googling something and then read someone's write-up on that, activity?
Yeah. No, totally. I totally.
It's just a different. That's why I focused on the test scores.
Yeah.
Because to some extent, I would argue the test scores is only one metric of learning.
But
again,
I guess.
Take away,
I see what you're saying, but I guess I agree with with cutting down the breaks. So from an athletic perspective, when you're in your off season, and I remember I had to explain this to a parent, because it was, summer was out, school was out, and that's the summer break. And so she thought summer break was a time to rest. And I was just like, actually, no, that the summer is the time where you do all your work. I mean, you rest for as long as you need to, is for your body to recover. And then after that, you're back to the grind. and trying to achieve and trying to get better at what you're doing. So at that point, I was kind of like, okay, I see that. And the results from the KIPP school was so inspiring to see these kids working, and they compared it to somebody trying to make partner.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's how hard the kids were working. And there was a little girl, she had her journal, and she basically, journaled for Malcom Gladwell her day and how it went, and how she had to get up in the morning and take an hour and a half train ride to work to school, and then she fell asleep in class, but then she had to wake up and fix herself up because she knew she had to get her information down. And basically the kids basically sign a contract. The parents and the kids sign a contract to say, okay, look, if you're coming here, you got to abide by these rules, line up, sit up straight, all these etiquette things that go a long way. So adapting the culture. So it's not just saying, okay, well, we can't be, this ethnic group can't be good at math because they're not from there. Well, no, these things can be adapted. And so, yeah, I thought that was very practical, just looking at the hard work and adapting and taking from other cultures. Now, the points where I disagreed with the book, there were points where he would kind of say, okay, well, if this situation was like that, or he would try to, as Thomas Sowell would say, practice cosmic justice in trying to recreate the balances to create to compensate for the inequalities, to level the playing field for people who didn't have the same opportunities. And so he would say, okay, well, if for example, the hockey example and the soccer example about kids born closer to the registration date, and the kids born further away from the registration date. And it also works for school as well. And I'm sure some people have heard that argument as well, depending on where your kid was born, and based on the registration date will impact how well they do. And so he was just basically saying, and it's just like this in basketball as well, that, making a certain team can mean everything, because if you make the elite program or the elite team, that means you get special attention, you get more practice time,
better trainers,
and so forth. So a lot of times, as depending on where you're born, you miss that opportunity. So he made the argument that like all the best, most of the majority, 40% of the best players on the Canadian national team or whatever team it was, the people were born from January, February, and March, closer to the registration date, which was January 1st.
Which would make them older, or the oldest amongst their peers.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So they'd be more developed, bigger, and then he made that argument for school.
Which
advantages.
Arbitrarily gave them an advantage because they would have either further brain development, further body development,
more time on the ice.
Everything else being constant.
Yeah, and so his argument was saying, okay, well, why don't we try to put kids, and this is not just hockey, but in academically as well, create leagues that cater to where the person was born. So you would be playing in a particular group. So instead of, breaking it down for the 12 months, you would probably break it down
6-month increments or something.
Yeah. So there'll be one league for the kids born from January to June, and then one from July to December. Right. And then, but now he said, of course, this would mean a lot more paperwork, but this would give people more of a fair chance. And he was suggesting this academically as well. And this would give people more of a fair opportunity. So I thought that was very fascinating. But I just kind of was like, well, that isn't really efficient in the way he was suggesting it. But it was just one of those things. He kept saying if this, and try to create something that was fair. And it kind of cut against his argument, because he was pointing out that, like, life is not fair. Like, all these unique situations have to happen to produce who you are. Sometimes it's the opportunities, and sometimes it's when you were born. And he was kind of saying like, yeah, some people can't help when they were born. And so one of the points I was kind of pushing back on, as if I was talking to him, was that, for the kid who was born on the wrong date and he's not as developed and he doesn't make this particular team, and so he misses out on the opportunity, the practice hours to get better. I mean, there's still an opportunity for the kid to come back and be able to make that team if he has the right people around him. If he has like an uncle or a dad or a mom who knows the system and is like, okay, well, you didn't make the team this year. Well, yeah, clearly because, you got a lot of work to do. And if the parent or the guardian is able to help that person get back on track, they could still make it.
Yeah, I think what you're saying, if I'm trying to generalize it, is that, not one of these factors can make or break you. But multiple, like missing one, but having three of others, right? So to your point, you said 40% are within the first 3 months of the year. Well, the other 60% clearly didn't have that individual advantage or opportunity, but other things obviously had to play a role for them to be able to achieve success, in terms of professional athletes.
Yeah.
Right. So to your point, good support system, maybe, let's use wealth as a simple example. They're born into a wealthier family, so the parents could pay for better coaches, even if they didn't make that better team because of their age, advantage, or whatever it is, right? So the point being that like and this is where I think the original point you made about like if you're careful with your mindset, don't start going, well, I don't have that or I don't have that, so therefore I'm going to fail. Right. So it's easy to become pessimistic because you're focusing on the components you don't have, as opposed to identifying, okay, here are the good things that I have, and how do I maybe add to those good things to increase my opportunities, to increase my skills, so that when I have opportunities, I will achieve success.
Right. And that's why, when I was just looking at it, I was like, oh, this is very fascinating. And I thought the book was really well done. And then, like you mentioned, the Matthew verse, and Matthew 25:29, and it says, this is in chapter 1, and he says, the opening, and says, for unto everyone that hath shall be given, and he shall have abundance. But from him that hath not shall be taken away, even though which he hath. Matthew 25:29. And it's basically a passage about stewardship, and taking care of what you have, and that, the Lord, can multiply what you have, but you got to be a good steward with it. And so it was helpful. It was helpful. But it's funny because now this is a sidebar. This is a totally funny side note in the book, and shows you, even though he's a very smart gentleman, his exegesis needs work. And so he says this. So check this out. He says, in the Bible, Joseph, the one who was sold into slavery, Joseph is cast out by his brothers and sold into slavery, and then rises to become the Pharaoh's right-hand man on the strength of his own brilliance and insight. Where does it say that in the Bible?
Yeah.
I was like, strength and wisdom on his own insight.
But
what about God giving him a vision, man?
Yeah. Well, I was gonna say, when you deny the supernatural as an option, you just cross those parts of the text out, and you're left with, well, it was obviously all him.
Yeah, but I think, not to, it's in the book, but I think it was just funny. I was just like, okay, this is clearly a smart gentleman, but clearly he doesn't have eyes to see, because we all know that's why I heard you laugh. Like, wait a minute, what? He pulled himself up by his own bootstraps. Like, how was he able to interpret those dreams, man? Like, you know what I mean? So, but anyways,
how was he able to resist temptation in a scenario that had he not resisted temptation, he probably didn't have any bootstraps left.
I don't know, man.
But anyways,
but
I can speak about ifs, but
Yeah, but there was a lot of ifs in the book. Okay, if this could have been thus, but I'm like, but it was kind of contradicting, in his point, saying, okay, well, there's unique situations that bring about this outcome, but maybe we can try to duplicate it. Like, how far do we have to go to recreate these opportunities? And I think that's just an endless journey.
There's two thoughts I'm assuming we're getting close to the end here that come to mind. One is, again, not to be on too much of a libertarian bent, but I think about the age example that you gave, and the if you contrast, the government sort of created scenarios with the free market, generally the government options when it comes, like, think about how much does age with regards to schooling, with regards to sports, all come down to kind of the government creating the programs or government creating the infrastructure. And the reason I bring that up is the only way a government can create a program for everybody is to try to create a very broad standard. And to some extent, he's demonstrating that it's these broad standards that create the problem. Whereas in the free market concept, you're actually trying to service each customer on a unique aspect. Now, obviously, you can find examples where that's not true. But what I mean is, the entrepreneurs are generally having less standard products and more multiple, or even just the market itself has multiple variations of similar products so that customers can have their unique need or unique needs met. I said that backwards. Wow. And I just say that as like a bit of, just to contrast, hey, why don't we have school starting every 6 months? Well, it's because we have standardized schooling across the board. If we had a purely free market sort of approach to schooling, would that have been the way that we do it? I don't know the answer to that, obviously, because we don't really have an ability to have competition. But again, not to go too far down the libertarian bent. The other thought I had, or really I want to reference a quote. I want to know if you've heard it, and I think if you've heard it, tell me. I'm wondering if it even came up in the book, because it might have. The quote is, difficult times create strong people. Strong people create good times. Good times create weak people. And weak people create tough times.
Good times create weak people?
Yeah. Because your ability to take for granted what you have.
Oh, okay.
And therefore you don't work hard. You don't strive because you have, think about like the rich kids who you're like, it's like, I don't know about you, but like I know where I grew up, the people that were the classmates that were of the richest families generally didn't work as hard.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of sort of the sequence, or and it just resonates to me. Like you gave the example of the Jews as well as the Asians with regards to working hard, but they were put in a context that they had to struggle. And the struggle is almost what created their strengths, or their, the strong people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And lastly, at the last chapter, he talks about the outliers in his life, and how he talks about his descendants being Jamaican, and so Malcom Gladwell is a light-skinned gentleman, but he talks about how his great grandfather was a white slave owner, and purchased his wife, and his descendants were therefore biracial, and because majority of the people in his family had lighter skin, there were advantages that were granted to him in his side of the family. And so I thought that was very powerful. It was really good. It was a really good illustration of how at that time the impact of white men coming to Jamaica, not to settle or to necessarily to create infrastructure, but to live. And so they would, take for themselves black women as their mistress and have children. And so you saw the impact of that shadeism, as some blacks would call it, and how, light-skinned people got better treatment, better education than dark-skinned people. And he was pointing to him being a beneficiary of that. And so he concludes with a thought and says this. And he says, "These were history's gifts to my family. And if the resources of that grocer, the fruits of those riots, the possibilities of that culture, and the privileges of that skin tone had been extended to others, how many more would now live a life of fulfillment in a beautiful house high on a hill?" Right? And so, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I have the thought of the economics side of me says, okay, but not to discredit kind of what his question is, but to say, is it disregarding the idea of limited resources? Well, I go back to the idea, the way the question was phrased. I don't know if you want to read it again.
These were history's gifts to my family. And if the resources of that grocer and the fruits of those riots, the possibilities of that culture, and the privilege of that skin tone had been extended to others, how many more would now live a life of fulfillment in a beautiful house high on a hill?
The way he phrased the question was we would just have more opportunities. And I'm saying, based on an economics limited resource perspective, we wouldn't have had more opportunities. We would have different people getting access to the same opportunities.
And my response to Malcom Gladwell would be, yes, that's nice, but everybody can't be light-skinned. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So for the listener, or for the someone who's looking at this book, who would you recommend the book to, or would you just recommend the book to everyone? And what would you say would kind of be your expectation that they would learn or take away from it, to summarize?
I think it's people who are ambitious, people who want more out of life and want to study those who've done it well. It's definitely helped me not to envy those people who have made it far in life and who've been very successful. So I don't envy them in the sense that before I used to assume, they had it easy to get to where they were at. But, everybody who made it far in life had to work hard, and God had to also open doors for them at the same time. Mm-hmm. But I would definitely recommend this book to people. They should get it, check it out. It definitely taught me that there's more to analysis and more to breaking down a person's success than just having a Mamba mentality or, just having a natural gift. Like, it takes more than privilege to make it. It's a factor of many things. As a Christian, I would say that, from a Christian, like, everybody wants to be successful, right? Or I should say everybody wants to be really successful. But what does that even look like? So for the Christian, it's finding contentment in Christ. Because like Job, you can have everything and then lose it in the blink of an eye.
Don't believe the hype. Read the type. This is Type Beast.